You're not my priority anymore. Deal with it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. He leaned against the kitchen counter, phone in his hand, scrolling through something that clearly mattered more than the conversation we were having. I stood there with a spatula in my hand, pasta sauce bubbling quietly on the stove behind me, trying to understand what those words were supposed to mean. Not my priority. I asked him to repeat it, not because I hadn't heard him, but because part of me hoped I had misunderstood. He didn't hesitate. It means exactly what it sounds like, he said. I've got other things going on, other people. You're still here. We're still together. You're just not at the top of my list anymore. I need you to be okay with that. The room felt suddenly smaller, hot, tight. My heart was beating fast, but my voice came out steady when I asked, "And if I'm not okay with it?" He shrugged, just a small, careless movement of his shoulders. "Then I don't know what to tell you. This is where I'm at." That was it. No apology, no reassurance, no attempt to soften the blow. Just honesty delivered without compassion. I turned back to the stove, stirred the sauce, took a breath, and said the only thing that made sense in that moment. "Okay." He looked surprised, like he had expected a fight. Tears. Begging. Instead, I stayed calm. Too calm. He nodded, satisfied, picked up his phone again, and walked out of the kitchen as if the conversation was over. That night, we ate dinner in silence. He went to bed early. I stayed on the couch staring at the wall, not crying, not angry, just empty. And that was when I started planning. I didn't argue, I didn't threaten, I didn't demand explanations. I let him believe nothing had changed. The next morning, he left for work like always. And while he was gone, I packed my life into boxes, took only what was mine, left no note, no message, no explanation. I placed my key on the kitchen counter and walked out of the apartment we had shared for almost 4 years. 2 days later, his best friend reached out to me, and what she told me explained everything. My name is Emily. I'm 30 years old, and the moment he told me I wasn't his priority anymore was the moment I finally believed him. Before that night in the kitchen, I would have described my relationship as stable. Not exciting in a movie scene way, but real, grounded. The kind of relationship you build when you believe in long-term plans instead of temporary sparks. I was 30 years old, working full-time, independent, and in what I thought was a committed relationship with my boyfriend of almost 4 years. His name is Daniel. We met at a mutual friend's housewarming party. Someone had put on a terrible horror movie in the background, the kind with obvious jump scares and awful acting. Daniel and I ended up standing in the kitchen debating whether bad horror movies were accidentally funny or just painful to sit through. We laughed. We challenged each other. By the end of the night, we were still talking while everyone else drifted off into smaller groups. When I left, he walked me to my car and asked for my number like it actually mattered. The first 2 years were solid, easy in the way that makes you trust something. We dated seriously, introduced each other to our families, spent weekends discovering new restaurants or staying in and cooking together. After about 18 months, we moved in together. A decent 2-bedroom apartment. Nothing fancy, but comfortable. We split the rent, set up routines, learned how to share space without losing ourselves. Morning coffee together, alternating who cooked dinner, lazy Sundays, occasional weekend trips when money allowed. Normal couple life. I felt chosen then. Daniel worked long hours, but he always made time for us. If he was late, he'd text. If he had plans, he included me or explained why he couldn't. We talked, we checked in. When something felt off, we addressed it, or at least I thought we did. The shift didn't come all at once. It started about 6 months before everything ended, subtle enough that I doubted myself. He began coming home later without explanation, started going out more with coworkers I'd never met, picked up new hobbies that somehow never included me, yoga classes, networking events, book clubs, things that sounded harmless on the surface. When I asked about his day, his answers became vague. It was fine. Nothing special. You wouldn't be interested. If I asked to join, he'd say it wasn't really my scene. I told myself he was just growing, expanding his world. I didn't want to be the girlfriend who clung too tightly. I tried to talk to him, gently. Calm conversations about feeling disconnected, about missing him. He always turned it back on me. Said I was being needy. Said healthy couples didn't have to do everything together. Said I needed to respect his independence. So I did. I backed off. I gave him space. Looking back now, I see the pattern clearly. Every time I asked for closeness, he asked for distance. Every time I expressed concern, he framed it as insecurity. And slowly, without realizing it, I started minimizing my own needs to keep the peace. His family noticed before I did. His sister once asked me quietly if everything was okay between us. I laughed it off. His parents started inviting him to things without including me. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was overthinking. I wasn't. I was standing at the beginning of a slow separation, one where he emotionally stepped away long before I physically left. And by the time he told me I wasn't his priority anymore, he was just saying out loud what his actions had been proving for months. I just hadn't wanted to hear it yet. Once I stopped dismissing my instincts, the signs were impossible to unsee. The distance between us wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, polite, wrapped in language that sounded reasonable if you didn't look too closely. Daniel's schedule became unpredictable. He'd text that he was running late without saying why. Dinners I used to plan around us slowly turned into dinners for one. When I asked if everything was okay, he'd smile and say, "Of course," in a way that felt practiced, like he'd learned how to end the conversation without actually answering it. His social world expanded while mine stayed exactly the same. New coworkers' names slipped into conversation without context, stories that started mid-sentence, as if I were supposed to already know the people involved. When I asked questions, he'd wave them off. "It's work stuff. You wouldn't know them. It's not a big deal." Each dismissal was small, but together they formed a wall. I noticed how often he protected his phone. Always face down, always within reach. If it buzzed, he checked it immediately. When I asked who he was texting, he'd say, "Just work," even at 10 o'clock at night. I told myself I was being paranoid. I didn't want to become someone who monitored or accused. I wanted to be trusting, secure. But trust needs reciprocity, and slowly that balance disappeared. I tried to reconnect in normal ways, suggested a movie night, asked if he wanted to plan a short trip like we used to. He'd say, "Maybe," and never follow up. When I pressed gently, he'd sigh and tell me I was putting too much pressure on him, that relationships shouldn't feel like obligations, that he needed space to breathe. So I gave it to him. I stopped asking questions. I stopped waiting up. I stopped expecting texts that said, "Thinking of you." I told myself this was what mature love looked like. Two people growing independently but still choosing each other. Except, I was the only one still choosing. There were moments that stung more than others. Once we ran into a coworker of his at the grocery store. She greeted him enthusiastically, asked about an inside joke I'd never heard. When she glanced at me, confused, he said, "Oh, this is Emily," like he was introducing a distant acquaintance, not his partner of almost 4 years. I smiled, but my stomach dropped. That night I lay awake replaying it, wondering why I felt so invisible standing right beside him. Friends noticed. My sister asked if Daniel and I were okay. I said yes too quickly. My best friend said he seemed different lately. I defended him without thinking, made excuses, explained his stress. I didn't want to admit that I was slowly being edged out of my own relationship. The atmosphere between us grew heavy, not hostile, just strained. Conversation stayed on the surface. Logistics, bills, schedules. We stopped talking about the future without acknowledging it. No more "when we" statements. Just "I" and "maybe." By the time we stood in that kitchen on Tuesday night, the conflict hadn't come out of nowhere. It had been building quietly for months. His words didn't create the distance. They named it. And hearing them spoken out loud forced me to confront a truth I had been avoiding. I wasn't losing him. He had already stepped away. I was just the last to know. Tuesday night didn't start as a confrontation. It started like dozens of other evenings had lately. Quiet, careful, and slightly disconnected. I was in the kitchen, making dinner, the kind of automatic routine you fall into when conversation feels fragile. Pasta boiling, sauce simmering, the familiar comfort of movement when words feel risky. Daniel stood a few feet away, leaning against the counter, phone in his hand. He was smiling at something on the screen. Not a small smile, a real one. The kind I hadn't seen directed at me in a while. I told myself not to read into it. I asked, casually, "Do you want to do anything this weekend? Maybe a movie, or that new restaurant we talked about?" He didn't look up. "I have plans." "Oh," I said, keeping my tone light. "What are you doing?" "Going out with friends." "Which friends?" I asked. "Maybe I know them." That's when he finally looked at me. His face was completely blank. No irritation, no warmth, just distance. "Does it matter?" he said. "I'm just making conversation," I replied, already feeling that familiar tightening in my chest. He set his phone down and crossed his arms, as if bracing himself for something he'd clearly already decided. "Look," he said, "I need to be honest with you." The words hit me harder than if he'd raised his voice. Honesty, in that tone, usually meant something was already over. "You're not my priority anymore," he continued. "Deal with it." For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard him. I stood there, spatula frozen in my hand, the smell of garlic and tomatoes suddenly nauseating. My heart was pounding, but my mind felt strangely still, like everything inside me had gone quiet at once. "Not your priority," I repeated slowly. "What does that mean?" "It means exactly what I said," he replied. "I have other things going on, other people I want to spend time with. You're still here. We're still together. You're just not at the top of my list anymore. I need you to be okay with that." The way he said it was what hurt the most. Calm, final, like he was laying out terms, not talking to someone he claimed to love. "And if I'm not okay with it?" I asked. He shrugged, not defensively, casually. "Then I don't know what to tell you. This is where I'm at." There was no apology in his voice, no attempt to soften the blow, no concern for how those words landed. He wasn't asking how I felt. He was informing me. I turned back to the stove because I needed something solid to look at. I stirred the sauce, took a breath, and felt a strange clarity settle over me. Not relief, not peace, just understanding. "Okay," I said. He blinked. "Okay?" "Okay," I repeated. "I hear you." He seemed surprised, like he had expected tears or an argument. Instead, he nodded, picked up his phone again, and said, "Good, I'm glad we're on the same page." Then he walked out of the kitchen. We ate dinner in silence. The TV was on, but neither of us watched it. He went to bed early. I stayed on the couch long after the apartment had gone quiet, staring at the wall, replaying his words over and over. "You're not my priority anymore." That was the moment something shifted permanently, not because of the cruelty of the sentence, but because of how easily it came to him, like he'd been thinking it for a long time. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't confront him again. I didn't ask questions. I planned. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the couch with the lights off, staring at the ceiling while the city hummed outside our windows. My body felt strangely calm, but my mind was working nonstop, lining things up, replaying moments I'd brushed aside, fitting them into a picture that finally made sense. I kept hearing his voice in my head. "You're not my priority anymore." Not said in anger, not said in frustration, said like a statement of fact. At some point, I realized I wasn't shocked. I was disappointed, yes, hurt, absolutely, but not surprised. That realization scared me more than his words. It meant part of me had already known this was coming. I sat up on the couch and looked around the apartment we'd shared for nearly 4 years. The bookshelf we picked out together. The couch we argued over because he wanted something cheaper. The kitchen table where we'd eaten 1,000 ordinary dinners. None of it felt like home anymore. It felt like a place I'd been slowly exiting for months without admitting it to myself. That's when I made the decision. Not out of anger, not to punish him, but because staying after hearing those words would have meant agreeing with them. Wednesday morning, he left for work at 7:30 like always. Kiss on the cheek, coffee in hand, no tension, no apology. He acted like everything was settled, like he'd said what he needed to say and I'd accepted it. And in a way, I had. The moment the door closed behind him, I called in sick to work. I never do that. My boss didn't even question it. I hung up, stood in the middle of the living room, and started packing. I'd been keeping mental notes for months without realizing it. What was mine, what I'd brought into the relationship, what I'd paid for, my desk, my bookshelf, my bed frame from college, my kitchen things, my clothes, my personal papers. I didn't care about the math anymore, even though I'd paid for more than half of what was in that apartment. I just wanted what was undeniably mine. I called a friend who had a truck, offered him $100 and lunch if he could help me move. He showed up at 9, took one look at my face, and didn't ask a single question. We worked methodically, no rushing, no music, just the sound of boxes sliding across the floor and furniture being carried out piece by piece. By 2 in the afternoon, the apartment looked wrong, empty in places it had never been empty before, gaps where my things had been. My side of the bathroom counter completely cleared. Before I left, I took my key off my keyring and placed it on the kitchen counter, right next to the coffee maker. I didn't leave a note. I didn't send a message. I didn't explain myself. I walked out. That night, I slept on my friend's couch, phone turned off, staring at the ceiling. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry. I felt empty, like something had already finished burning and there was nothing left but ash. Thursday morning, I turned my phone back on. 23 missed calls, 37 text messages, confusion, panic, anger. Where are you? Did you take your stuff? What the hell is going on? This is so immature. At least talk to me. I read them once, then I blocked his number, blocked him on social media, and went to work like nothing had happened. For the first time since he told me I wasn't his priority, I felt like I had chosen myself. Blocking him didn't bring peace right away. It brought noise from every other direction. By Friday afternoon, the story had already started moving without me. Mutual friends reached out with cautious messages, asking if everything was okay, if something had happened, if Daniel and I were taking a break. I kept my replies short and neutral. We broke up. I moved out. I'm okay. I didn't explain. I didn't justify. I wasn't ready to carry anyone else's opinions on top of my own. That same afternoon, I got a message request from his best friend. We'd met a few times over the years. Always friendly, never close. The message was simple. Can we talk? There's something you need to know. I accepted and gave her my number. We agreed to talk during my lunch break. I sat in my car in the parking garage, engine off, phone pressed to my ear, bracing myself for whatever was coming. She sounded nervous, apologetic before she even started. I wasn't sure if I should reach out, she said, but after what happened, I felt like you deserved the truth. The words that followed rearranged everything. Daniel had been seeing someone else for about 3 months. Someone from work. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't emotional confusion. It wasn't a gray area. She had seen them together, holding hands, kissing. When she confronted him, he admitted it. Said things between us had been drifting. Said it just happened. Asked her not to tell me because he was figuring things out. I sat there gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles hurt. She told me she'd tried to push him to do the right thing, to either end things with me or end things with the other woman. He'd promised he would. He hadn't. And when he called her Wednesday night in a panic about me leaving, painting himself as the victim, she couldn't stay quiet anymore. When the call ended, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat there in silence until my lunch break was over, letting the information settle into the space his words had already created. You're not my priority anymore. Of course I wasn't. Someone else had taken that place. Saturday morning, the escalation reached my doorstep. He showed up at my friend's apartment. I don't know how he found the address. Probably called enough people until someone slipped. My friend answered the door. Daniel was standing there, eyes red, voice already breaking. He asked to see me. My friend told him I didn't want to. That's when the crying started. Loud, desperate. Neighbors peeking out of their doors. I stepped into the hallway and stood behind my friend, arms crossed, heart steady in a way that surprised me. Please, Daniel said, just talk to me. 5 minutes. You have 3, I replied. He demanded to know why I'd left without explanation. Told me how terrifying it was to come home to an empty apartment. Accused me of being cruel, immature. I let him finish. Then I spoke. You told me I wasn't your priority, I said. I took you seriously. He backtracked immediately. Said it came out wrong. Said he was stressed. Said he needed space, not an ending. And the woman from work? I asked. The color drained from his face. Your best friend told me, I continued calmly. 3 months. That's why I wasn't your priority. He tried to explain, minimize, reframe. I didn't let him. You chose to cheat, I said. You chose to keep both of us. You chose to tell me to deal with it instead of ending things like an adult. He cried harder then. Promised therapy, promised his change, promised love. I didn't move. You don't treat people you love like this, I said. My friend closed the door gently. We could still hear Daniel sobbing outside for a few minutes before his footsteps faded down the stairs. Over the next week, the fallout spread. His best friend told me he'd cut her off completely, accusing her of betrayal. Mutual friends heard his version first, that he'd made one comment in frustration and I'd abandoned him, that I was cold, that I'd ended 4 years over a sentence. I stayed quiet. I let the truth exist without defending it. And slowly, the weight shifted. People started noticing the gaps in his story, the timing, the contradictions. Some reached out to ask for my side. I told it plainly. No embellishment, no insults, just facts. The escalation wasn't loud, it was cumulative. Every lie met with silence, every excuse met with distance. And inside me, something solid was forming. Not anger, not bitterness, resolve. The darkest moment didn't come when I found out about the cheating. It didn't come when he showed up crying at my friend's door. It came later, when everything went quiet. After the chaos settled, after the explanations stopped and the messages slowed, I was left alone with myself. No adrenaline, no confrontation, just silence. And in that silence, the weight of everything finally landed. I had moved from my friend's couch into a short-term rental while I looked for a place of my own. The apartment was clean, empty, impersonal. No shared memories, no arguments echoing off the walls. Just space, too much of it. At night, I lay awake listening to unfamiliar sounds, my mind replaying the last 6 months in brutal detail. I questioned myself constantly. How long had this really been going on? How many nights had he come home late after seeing her and lied to my face? How many times had I apologized for asking for closeness while he was already choosing someone else? The worst thoughts crept in quietly. Maybe if I'd been more interesting. Maybe if I hadn't backed off so easily. Maybe if I'd pushed harder instead of staying calm, he would have respected me more. I hated those thoughts, but they came anyway, slipping under the door of my mind when I was too tired to fight them. One night, I sat on the floor of the bedroom, back against the bed, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. I found an old photo on my phone of us from our first year together. We were younger, happier, his arm around my shoulders, my head tilted toward his. I stared at it longer than I should have. I wasn't missing him. I was grieving the version of myself who had believed she was loved honestly. That realization broke something open inside me. I cried then, for real, not quietly, not neatly. The kind of crying that leaves your chest aching and your eyes swollen. I cried for the years I invested, for the trust I gave freely, for the way I had slowly learned to doubt my own needs to keep someone else comfortable. The loneliness was sharpest in small moments. Cooking for one, reaching for my phone with no one to text, waking up in the middle of the night expecting to hear him breathe beside me and remembering he wasn't there anymore. Freedom, I learned, doesn't feel liberating right away. Sometimes it feels like loss wearing a different face. I almost reached out to him that night. I typed a message, nothing dramatic, nothing accusatory, just a question, just an opening. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over send, already imagining his response. Apologetic, emotional, just enough to pull me back into the cycle of explanations and promises. That scared me more than the loneliness. I deleted the message. Instead, I turned my phone face down and sat there in the dark, letting the grief wash over me without trying to escape it. I realized something important in that moment. Walking away had been the right decision, but it didn't mean it wouldn't hurt. It didn't mean I wouldn't miss what I thought we had, and it didn't mean I was weak for feeling that pain. The dark moment wasn't about regret, it was about mourning. Mourning the future I'd imagined, mourning the trust that had been broken, mourning the version of myself who stayed quiet for too long. And somewhere in that grief, stripped of distractions and justifications, I finally saw the truth clearly. I hadn't lost my worth when he chose someone else. I had nearly lost it when I stayed. That understanding didn't fix everything, but it gave me something solid to stand on, something that would carry me into whatever came next. The turning point didn't arrive with a confrontation or a revelation from him. It arrived quietly, from someone I didn't expect to matter as much as she did. It was his best friend again. She texted me one evening asking if I wanted to get coffee. Not to talk about him, she said, just to check in. I hesitated before agreeing. Part of me wanted to keep my distance from anything connected to that part of my life, but another part of me was tired of carrying everything alone. We met at a small cafe near my temporary place. She looked uncomfortable when she arrived, like she was bracing for impact. After a few minutes of small talk, she sighed and said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it clearly." She told me that after I left, the lies started unraveling. Daniel hadn't just minimized what he'd done. He'd rewritten it. To her, to mutual friends, to himself. He said I'd been emotionally distant for months, that I'd checked out, that he'd felt lonely and neglected, and that the woman from work had just been there at the wrong time, listening, supporting him, making him feel seen. And the thing is, she said quietly, stirring her coffee, he actually believes that version now. That sentence landed harder than everything else. She went on. She told me she'd finally confronted him directly. Asked him why he hadn't ended things with me before starting something else. Asked him why he thought it was okay to tell me I wasn't his priority instead of taking responsibility. His answer wasn't anger or shame, it was avoidance. He said he didn't want to be the bad guy, she told me. He wanted the situation to resolve itself. Resolve itself. As if relationships end on their own without choices being made. That was the moment something inside me clicked into place. I wasn't dealing with a man who made a mistake and owned it. I was dealing with someone who avoided accountability at all costs. Someone who wanted comfort without consequence. Someone who would rather slowly erase me from his life than face the discomfort of honesty. Walking home after that conversation, I felt lighter in a way I hadn't since this started. Not relieved. Certain. For weeks, I'd been replaying conversations, wondering if I'd acted too harshly by leaving without a discussion, without closure. I'd questioned whether I owed him one last conversation, one last chance to explain himself. I didn't. Clarity doesn't always come from answers. Sometimes it comes from understanding the pattern. That night, I blocked him everywhere I hadn't already. Email, messaging apps, everything. Not out of anger, out of finality. I wasn't shutting a door in a dramatic moment. I was locking it quietly and keeping the key. The next day, I signed a lease on a small one-bedroom apartment. Nothing fancy, affordable, mine. As I signed the paperwork, I felt something settle in my chest, a sense of direction I hadn't felt in months. This was my decision now, not a reaction, not an escape. I wasn't leaving because he cheated. I wasn't leaving because he said something cruel. I was leaving because I finally saw who he was when it mattered most. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. Once I stopped responding, the consequences began to fall into place without me doing anything at all. I didn't defend myself publicly. I didn't correct his version of events unless someone asked directly. I simply stepped back and let the truth carry its own weight. Daniel struggled with that more than he ever struggled with losing me. At first, he tried to control the narrative. He told people I had disappeared without warning, that I'd ended nearly 4 years over a single conversation, that I'd been emotionally distant for months. In his version, he was honest, vulnerable, blindsided. I was cold, extreme, unreasonable. But stories have weak spots, and over time, people noticed them. Friends started asking quiet questions. Why, if he'd been so unhappy, had he never ended things? Why had there been another woman involved before the breakup? Why did his explanations keep changing depending on who was listening? The more he talked, the more inconsistent it all sounded. His best friend told me later that the friend group grew tense. People stopped inviting him out together. Conversations felt strained. The same social circle that had once made him feel important now felt uncomfortable. Too many people knew too much. Too many versions of the truth were floating around. His family shifted as well. His sister stopped defending him. She didn't reach out to me directly, but she stopped repeating his narrative. His parents, who had once praised him for being honest, grew quiet when more details surfaced. Not because they suddenly took my side, but because the situation was no longer easy to excuse. Meanwhile, my life became smaller and steadier. I moved into my new apartment and unpacked slowly, intentionally. I arranged furniture without compromise, chose colors I liked without negotiation, created routines that belonged to me alone, morning coffee without checking my phone, evenings without waiting for someone to come home. People reached out less frequently over time, and that was okay. I didn't need an audience. I needed peace. Daniel reached out once more, weeks later, through a number I hadn't blocked yet. A short message. I just want us to be on good terms. We didn't have to end like this. I read it once and understood exactly what he meant. He didn't want reconciliation. He wanted absolution, a way to feel better without facing the full weight of what he'd done. I didn't reply. The most telling moment came unexpectedly. I ran into one of his coworkers at a cafe near my office. She hesitated when she saw me, then said quietly, "I'm sorry for how everything went down." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The look on her face told me she knew enough. That was when it really sank in. I didn't need to explain myself. I didn't need to defend my decision. The truth had already settled where it belonged. I hadn't destroyed anything. I had stepped away from something that was already broken. And by doing so, I removed myself from the role I'd been playing for too long. The one who absorbed discomfort. The one who stayed quiet to keep things smooth. The one who made it easier for him to avoid accountability. The fallout wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow, inevitable, and earned. And for the first time, the weight of someone else's choices was no longer on my shoulders. 3 months have passed since I walked out of that apartment. My life looks different now. Not bigger, not louder, but clearer. I live alone in a small one-bedroom place that feels like mine in a way our shared apartment never truly did. There are no arguments about where things go, no tension hanging in the air, no need to measure my words before I speak, even when no one else is there to hear them. The first few weeks were hard. I won't pretend otherwise. Starting over always is, but somewhere between unpacking boxes and establishing new routines, something inside me softened. Not in a fragile way, in a grounded one. I stopped replaying our conversations, stopped wondering what I could have done differently, because the truth is simple, even if it took me a long time to accept it. When someone tells you you're not their priority, believe them. Not in a dramatic way, not with anger or revenge. Believe them enough to stop fighting for a place they've already given away. I didn't leave because he cheated, even though he did. I didn't leave because he hurt me with one sentence. I left because that sentence revealed everything his actions had been saying for months. I heard through mutual friends that he's single now. The woman from work didn't turn into anything serious. Apparently, she was seeing someone else too. There's a strange kind of symmetry in that, but I don't take pleasure in it. It doesn't change anything for me. He reached out once more, a brief message apologizing for everything. I didn't respond. Not because I'm bitter, but because there was nothing left to resolve. Closure doesn't always come from conversation. Sometimes it comes from consistency, from choosing yourself again and again until the past loses its grip. I've started dating casually, nothing serious yet, just honest conversations, clear intentions, mutual effort. It feels different now. I pay attention to how I feel instead of how things look. I don't ignore discomfort. I don't shrink to fit someone else's pace or priorities. If there's one lesson I hope stays with you, it's this. Love is not about endurance. It's not about staying quiet to keep the peace. And it's not about waiting patiently while someone decides if you matter. Love is a daily choice. And when someone stops choosing you, the most powerful thing you can do is stop negotiating your worth. I didn't leave loudly. I didn't beg. I didn't explain myself to exhaustion. I listened. I believed him. And I acted accordingly. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't fighting to stay. It's knowing when to walk away with your dignity intact.